No heads up.
Where's the fun in that?
All right. So any second now, it's going to start recording, or it already
It's
is.
recording.
Yeah, it just went out.
It isn't says it on mine yet. I hit the button too, which is.
I can
So
stop
I
the
apologize to
recording,
everybody
and
on
you can
YouTube that's
restart it if you
listening to
want.
this banter. There
Oh,
it
yeah,
goes. All right. It now says it's recording, although perhaps up to 30 seconds of that was also recording. So thanks for joining this June edition. We can start by everybody wishing me a happy birthday because my birthday was yesterday.
Happy birthday, Ed.
Hey, thanks.
Happy
Happy
belated
birthday to the most modest member of the
Should we
team.
sing? I don't should sing that yet.
Yeah, let's all sing. No, I'm just kidding. Yep, I'm 23 years old now. All right. At least in maturity, maybe.
The one comes out 22 Ed or something.
Yeah. So we're just kind of filling out the agenda today. We're going to talk about what's coming up in the next release, which I actually think we're going to do in 3 weeks. You've heard me say before timelines that but we're in a better spot. We actually have a release candidate that we're starting to test now, and things are in pretty good shape. Going to talk about some updates to the operator. Perry's able to make it today, which thanks for. I know the timing is probably not ideal for you, and I want to talk about that at the end too. Maybe we get some input on what another time would be to cover more time zones. I think we should alternate or run multiple calls or something, because a little bit late on the folks that are not in the North America time zones. Talk about GrafanaCon and Q&A if we have any. So Loki 2.6. I don't think we're going to do a 2.5.1. Mostly because I think it would be better just to do a 2.6. There are a couple things we could backport, but I think we'll just do a 2.6. Anyway, we are, like I said, it's actually going to be the K100 release, which is our internal numbering scheme that will likely be is currently the release candidate for 2.6. If anybody here has a chance, can you go find the Docker image for that and post a link to it here? So if anybody wants to help us sort of beta test 2.6, feel free to run that K100 image. It's made it as far as our ops environment, right? I'm not sending people after something that we've. Okay, good. So it should be fine. And big feature wise, Christian, I'm going to put you on the spot. You did the work for query splitting. Do you want to talk about what instant query splitting is?
Yeah, it's basically.
Your mic is like up along your. Sorry, this is what happens when I surprise people.
So yeah, it basically does what it says. If you had instant queries with long time range, so the range is like this square brackets range. So if you're an instant query that goes over long range, we can split up the aggregation into multiple sub requests that are individually and in parallel executed and merged together then to kind of returned as a result. And yeah, it works for quite a lot of range aggregation. There are a few limitations regarding when you have like a parser stage in the query, where sometimes we can't split that due to the amount of zeros it would generate in the subqueries. But yeah, most of the queries kind of can be parallelized in that way, and hope to gain some improvements there.
Yeah, so the important bit to make sure you can split your query is to make sure you have aggregations if you're using parsers like JSON or log format, because they can explode the cardinality of the stuff that they process. And if you don't sort of wrap that with a sum, we don't split those queries because it causes some sort of highly bounded growth of memory. So wrap with sum or max or average or min or some kind of aggregator when using log or JSON. You can use, there's the JSON explicit parser that doesn't have this requirement though. So like if you do JSON of, foo equals foo or foo, something like that.
Yeah, the same applies for pattern and regex parser as well, where you just extract a single or a few labels, but like the general ones with JSON or a log format would just very likely explode the cardinality of the labels.
Go for it, Perry. See a question?
Is this somehow bound using the query scheduler, or is this not required?
You need the front end or front end plus scheduler. You just need to have, so the front end actually does the splitting and aggregation.
Okay.
Using a query scheduler is generally recommended because it is kind of an improvement over how the front end worked, but both will do the same thing. Ultimately, go ahead, Christian.
Regarding like enabling it, you need to set the split query by interval setting, which controls also the range queries, which are split by range. It's the same. It's actually the same setting.
Which is by default true.
Which is by default, yes.
30 minutes, I think.
15,
we made the default, or 15 minutes, 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Anyway, I would say we can still let's say be on the query frontend and query model. We don't need explicitly the scheduler for this. Of course, not having the scheduler means your query frontend is not that easy, horizontal scalable. But for most use cases, at least 2 replicas are good enough. Why bother having the scheduler? So.
Yep, everything you said is absolutely correct. And yeah, so you're right too. Most people don't need a scheduler. If you're running the single binary or the SSD modes, they enable the front end and scheduler for you as well. So you get that included. If you're in microservices mode, you just need the front end or front end plus scheduler, but the scheduler is not a requirement. It's a nice feature for when you try to horizontally scale your front ends. If you are running a big cluster and you want more front ends, the V1 front end implementation kept the per tenant queue in each. And so as you horizontally scale them, you multiply the number of queues, which lets more tenants send more queries. So the scheduler broke that queue out into a separate component so that that problem doesn't happen. Travis, I hope you were expecting me to call you on this. Should have given you a heads up. You want to talk about the work that you've all been doing for deletes and kind of the status and maybe what's there, what's not there in this release. It's going to be experimental, but
it is. And so we're super excited. I don't think it's actually going to work in this release. So I was just going back and looking because it's K100. And so the stuff, the PR that sort of fixed a pretty critical bug went in after K100 was
okay.
done.
Well,
so
we could backport that too into the release, I think. So to make that better.
Basically, what this does is it gives you either real-time query filtering or real-time query filtering with actually deleting stuff out of your object store to go back and retroactively delete logs. Sort of the key use case we were fitting is something like we've leaked personally identifiable information or something into the logs, and you can go back and actually delete that stuff. It happens near real time, so you'll see the stuff disappear from your metric and log queries in a matter of minutes. And then sort of on the overall compaction cycle, when we compact the indices, we'll go and also rewrite chunks and just sort of remove any logs if you have that set. Sort of with that bug fix included, we've done some testing. We can see it sort of filter things as we expect, and we can see it delete pretty large volumes of logs, I would say, sort of like 2+ million logs over the course of a day, and do pretty well. There is some risk in terms of this being experimental that we're not quite sure how expensive deletes are on the compactor, and so it could interfere with some index compaction, but we're not sure to what extent.
I think the way what you're describing there is the compaction loop runs at a specific time, and with a delete request, it gets processed in the same loop that does compaction. And so if it has to go through a huge amount of data to mark stuff for deletes, it could cause that to run longer than the normal compaction cycle. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it could cause, and for that table, or only that set of tables that have got that are affected by the deletes. So sort of the tables are processed asynchronously or in parallel, and so really, yeah, only for the tables that would be affected by that delete. And then sort of what might happen in that case is you might stack up compactions where eventually this thing will clear.
Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, there's a lot of sort of future opportunity for us. These don't all have to run in the same sort of process. It's just we're adding to what's there. So we're going to play around with it a little bit and see what we need to do to make sure we can kind of hit reasonable requests for deletes. Is there anybody here to talk about multi-tenant queries that worked on it?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, Jordan.
Happy
nice.
to. Yeah, so Loki, if you're running in multi-tenant mode with 2.6 will support a new Boolean configuration value for queriers to enable multi-tenant query support. And what that will allow you to do is if you specify more than one tenant ID concatenated together with a vertical line character in the xscope org ID HTTP header, when you make requests to Loki's query API endpoints, you'll receive results back for the multiple tenants that you specify in that header. And we support label filtering on tenant IDs with that enabled, such that you can see results specifically for one or multiple tenants, but we won't support that tenant ID filtering in stages yet. So that's important to keep in mind. And we sort of, when you enable this configuration, we append a new label value that has that tenant ID that supports that filtering. And yeah, the implementation is in the multi-tenant querier for anyone who wants to see that.
Can you explain the stages part of that?
Sure. So I have some documentation I can link. I'll put this here in the doc. An example would be if you specified like app equals foo underscore tenant ID match on A and pipe that or send that to the log format, that'll return all the results. But if you tried to do something like this, where you specify the tenant ID in a stage, that won't work.
Oh, okay. So, right, you can only use the double underscore tenant within the label matcher.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Was there a doc that you pulled this from that we can link here for anybody that's reading the notes?
I'll grab the path to that right now.
Should probably do that for these other things too if we have docs.
Yeah, and I just merged that into the documentation.
Oh, nice. Was there the whole time. Just make sure we backport that into the K100 branch too.
Yeah.
You can add the backport label. Oh, and after the fact, after the merge, and it'll still get picked up.
Sorry, Perry, I saw, and Kavi both had questions. I'll try my best to answer them.
One question is, if I remember correct, this is something we can disable via configuration, not allowing multi-tenant queries, right?
It's disabled by default. Mm-hmm.
Okay, there is an op, I would say, so you want to disable it on clusters where you don't allow cross-tenant queries. Okay. Right.
I have one question. I haven't read the doc though, probably I should have, but you're saying like the query results that is coming out of the query is basically a combination of the tenant's ID you passed via this Xcode org ID, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if I mean, I'm trying to understand, like, so I can pass any number of tenants there, and I can filter via this extra label __ tenant ID or something in the query itself. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so if the any of the tenant ID is wrong or like doesn't exist, will it be like any error, __ error, or is it like silently discarded?
It would behave the same as though we were using an individual query instance for a single tenant and the query didn't return results. So, but you would still receive the valid results merged together, as well as, I guess, the error for the tenant from which the logs weren't successfully queried.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Cool, thanks.
Do they use the first tenant's queues? Like if I'm querying for tenant A and tenant B, do we know?
I think it uses all of them. I don't think because I think we just simply look at splitting and merging them at the request response level from like the individual query or flow that would happen for a single tenant.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to take a look. Thanks.
So depending on if you do auth and how you do that in front of Loki, like if you, for example, have direct access between Grafana and Loki, you can set headers in a data source config and make a data source that specifies multiple org IDs. If you have, like, we run a custom auth layer, it would be responsible for taking whatever credentials it takes and turning that into a request that has multiple tenant IDs in the Xscope org ID header. So there is some sort of user or operator requirement to kind of make this work. But ultimately, like, whoever sets the Xscope org ID can now pipe delimit multiple of them to get results from multiple tenants. Go ahead, Perry.
Do we have any? I mean, since this is not implemented on the chunk level, the chunks stay basically the same as before. We do this all this work in Querier. Do we have any, let's say, higher impact on either on pulling things from the index or from, let's say, the more tenants you use, you download more chunks in general? So are there any? I mean, you can blow up basically either your PVC on the queries, okay, not anymore in the index gateway, or you can blow basically your memory because you download 3 times more or whatever many times, 10 times more chunks for querying them, right?
It shouldn't be any different conceptually than tenant A and tenant B running the same query at the same time. So as long as it's going to split into separate queues and then get processed by whatever resources you have. So in a multi-tenant environment, like, it's
okay,
like so it shouldn't really have a noticeable impact on. I mean, you can do the equivalent of saying make 50 tenants run the same query at the same time, which, can definitely cause a huge amount of query traffic, right? Like, but it shouldn't cause, like, on an individual query or any kind of undue pain.
So simply this means if you have done before 50 individual tenant queries for each tenant, the only nice thing of this feature is the syntactic sugar with the pipe plus the composing of the result set in the front end at the end of the day. That's all.
Yeah.
So we just simplify the user experience here. So,
right.
Okay.
It's better for operators, specifically in multi-tenancy mode, and should be just like a nice, easy quality of life improvement.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
the people that I think benefit most, like, so if you're an organization running Loki and you configure tenants per business units, which is nice because then you can set different limits and sort of limit how much one business unit can impact an entire cluster. But you have like audit or security use cases that you need to be able to run queries over all of those tenants. This enables that kind of functionality. You know, if you're a service provider like we are, like we don't run multi-tenant queries over our tenants. They're all just kept isolated. But I think it works out kind of nice for the folks that are, because multi-tenancy is a nice way within an org to kind of separate some of your, you know, basically to help give you some protections of limits. I mean, this is actually something that will probably help Grafana Labs. We tend to run largely large single tenants for our internals. But, you know, as our company grows, we see more and more that there would be some advantages to having separate tenants, even internally. But still good use cases for being able to query across all of them. Did I miss another hands up? Christian?
Yeah, I have a question because you mentioned querying all tenants, like having this use case of multiple departments and like a single, like an auditing user or whatever who wants to audit to query all of the tenants. Do we have like a wildcard, like a star for all tenants, or do we explicitly need to specify all tenants?
We do you can support that. The star character as a wildcard does work for all of the tenants in a data source that you have configured.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's
Need to
cool.
be
I didn't know
careful.
that. What is, I'm curious how that works now. But well,
We can talk about it offline. Yes.
how would it know what all of the tenants
Another
are?
question.
Is my question.
I was gonna say I think that. Good.
I might be mistaken in that you can't pass that as the Xscope org ID, but rather the username for auth on a data source that you're configuring. So sorry, I misspoke there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I think it may only work for gel is the TLDR. That's how it works in
There
gel.
you go. Upgraded
Right.
gel. You can have wildcard querying.
Sorry. Thanks, Jen. Apologies for that.
Yeah, no worries. I mean,
No worries.
the reality for Loki is Loki doesn't know all of the tenants. I mean, you could ask every index file that it has what all of the tenants are. But that's basically, we rotate the index file every day. Each day could have any number of tenants in it. And so a wildcard approach would either require that, like we'd have to go ask every index file in the time range what the tenants were, which is possible. Or we'd have to track it separately, which is likely what Gel is doing. I can guarantee you is what Gel is doing. Yeah, so but that functionality of doing the ask all that does not exist, is not implemented. So if you're listening in the community and that's really important to you, I would say you know, file an issue or write the PR. That's cool too. Both, you know. All right, good questions on that. We ready to park it so that Dylan can talk to us about this symlink fix in Promptail?
Yeah, sure. So when you are configuring Promptail, you can specify to ingest data from file. And the problem was that if you're pointing to a symlink file folder and you are actually looking for a file inside that symlinked folder, that would not work. So we fixed that for 2.6.
Yeah, specifically if the symlink was a relative symlink. So if the symlink was defined with ... / to do directory traversal, it wouldn't work. So you would, I don't remember how it failed, but there was another function within Go. Somebody from the community fixed this also, which is nice. It's just a little bit scary to make changes like this because, you know, you're changing the core way we resolve symlinks in Promptail. But we've not had any trouble so far in our testing. But So now it just uses a different function, which I believe just resolves the relative symlink to be absolute and then uses that instead. So if you are trying to tail a file, which is a relative symlink, it should work in 2.6. All right, Perry. Should we expect in Loki Operator 0.1.0?
Yeah, there isn't any 0.1.0 yet. And first of all, I need to apologize. I should have been in a community meeting by December or January when we officially merged the code into the Grafana Loki repository. But
yeah, I think that I should properly introduce Perry as the very nice fellow from Red Hat that has created and spearheaded the Loki operator that was merged into the Loki repo in December. That time frame.
Yes.
But then Perry went on parental leave and did all kinds of other fun stuff.
Yes.
But Perry is here now. So
yeah. Thank you, Ed, for the introduction. Besides the Loki operator, which is not built by me only, but also by many other people across 3 companies. I'm a father of twins, so that's why I need to apologize that I haven't been here for quite so long. Anyway, I managed to get a free beer from my wife today. She takes care of the kids, so I can be here and finally announce this. It's 3 months now, and more than 3 months, so now almost 5 months that we work upstream only. The Loki operator is basically a side project and is in a ZIG inside Grafana Loki with the same governance model, the same licensing thing. And the purpose of this project is to be a Kubernetes native operator first. Although I work for Red Hat, and yes, we build OpenShift, and we sometimes have this OpenShift BSNet. We try to build things for Kubernetes first. This works quite well. Couple of highlights, because I should probably put a small slide deck the next time and give a proper intro, but a couple of highlights here is this operator is currently capable to manage 2 types or 2 sizes of Loki clusters. We call them sizes because we know Loki is not easy. If you're not an expert, it's not easy to put requests and limits on it without being the expert. So we say, okay, there is something we call 1x small, which has some, let's say, defined CPU and memory, let's say, requirements. And if you run it, it's a beast that you can ingest 200 to 500 gigabyte per day. And 1x medium, I think, where you can ingest 2 terabyte of logs per day. So it's it aligns well with what we have in KSonnet and upstream, but we have, let's say, variation that we call small, and medium is probably close to what we have in Grafana Loki production KSonnet files. It's a thing that has only member list and multi shippers, so it's not a general Loki operator that you can decide use for Cassandra, Bigtable, whatever. It's a thing for most Kubernetes users that require just run it on Kubernetes and give me something like an S3 to write in. And you can pick anything currently you find as an S3. We support them all the types. The thing that is another highlight here is you don't get Loki, you get a Loki stack. That's how we call our CRD. Because you get also a small reverse proxy in front of it that can do authentication authorization for you. Authentication is basically you can configure tenants and their OIDC providers, and authorization can either be a little bit static, like your users, or it can be something like Open Policy Agent, where you send things back to someone implementing OPA for you. And basically tenancy is included in the CRD, so it's optional, but you can start right ahead and say tenant A goes OIDC here, tenant B goes OIDC there, and then you have different accesses, and you can give it. This is a little bit of what actually the non-open source Cortex gateway does, but I think we are by far smaller than what the Cortex gateway does at Grafana. It's, let's say, the thing that And it's not an Nginx, definitely not. It's a Go project we use also at Red Hat, which we call the Loki Stack Gateway. Yeah, besides that, most of the work has been in the last couple of months completing pieces that make Loki a robust, or the Loki Stack a robust, let's say, package. Like we have alerting rules and recording rules and CRDs, like you have been used with Prometheus rules from the Prometheus operator. And also the ruler config is a new CRD. It's basically a thing that gives you the capabilities to connect to an alert manager or a remote write. So it's basically configuring the ruler for the actual use cases like sending and notifying alert manager. And the last piece is if you take this and anything we have here that we say you can use them optionally, it's everything is managed through feature flags, which you can, when you install the operator, you can say, give me, for example, TLS endpoints for service monitors, give me TLS for gRPC if you want to do this. And we have, let's say, a small, YAML that has all the feature flags, and we use it in OpenShift because we know in OpenShift you have a Prometheus, you have TLS by default. So it's a little bit of automation for people running on OpenShift, this operator. And we launched this as Red Hat, the same code base. We just only take the Golang code, build it on the Go compiler on RHEL, and just ship it. That's all what we do. We don't have any downstream repository. At least I do my best not to have ever one downstream repository, because this is just more trouble. So we develop only upstream here. We're a very small ZIC, 4 to 5 developers in total, although there are more Red Hatters, around another 2 or 3 that commit to there, but they are not part of the team yet. We haven't, let's say, gave them permissions yet, or we haven't called them, let's say, we haven't taken any vote to include more members here. But I would like to see that the community joins and tests this thing. From what I can tell from our telemetry, I have at least 21 customers currently testing this in tech preview at Red Hat. I would like to see more and more non-Red Hat people testing this, at least Envision is, IBM is on this. So you're welcome to join. Open PRs, issues, whatever. You find us on the Slack on Loki Operator Dev. And you are welcome to join and bring your sauce on how this may make this operator even better for Kubernetes deployments. That's all I want to share. We are here. We are upstream. Come and join us. That's my key message for today. Questions?
I have a couple questions, Barry. First of all, congratulations on the twins. Very exciting.
They're 18 months old. They're 18
now. Okay.
Yeah. We have parental leave in Germany after the first year for fathers, but that's a different thing.
Oh, good. I mean, that's still hard with twins. I mean, 18 months was harder just one, so I can't imagine two.
Not it's easier, yes. Let's formulate it like this.
So I had my question there about limits. Does the Loki stack currently impose any sort of limits per tenant limits, or are the limits just sort of per cluster?
No, there are no per tenants limits. You can define in, let's say, whatever list of tenants you have. It's in the CRD, and it gets replicated into the limits or the overrides config if you use any limits per tenant. The gateway per self that we use, we currently use the same gateway for our internal, still not operator managed, but at least Loki installations in Red Hat, and we are running currently around per region around 10 tenants. So this is a piece of cake. It's basically only doing OIDC per tenant. There is nothing more. It will be a nice thing to have now the piece with multi-tenant queryers, but this is just only an option for us. And and how will you control this feature? For example, in OpenShift, we control it tenancy through RBAC. So you need to be inside specific namespaces in order to access a specific tenant. So depends how you configure it. Yeah.
Got you. So when you're sizing your cluster, you sort of think about it at the holistic level, not necessarily on a tenant size.
Yeah, I mean, 1x small can be, I mean, if you have 200 tenants but they still keep in the 200 gigabyte and between 200 and 500 gigabyte per day thing, you are fine. I mean, it's still one big noisy tenant can put the queries, because in the 1x small, we have just 2 queries. It's for small installations, basically thought. It might blow up, yes. If you just overuse, it's not meant to have too many tenants, but you don't need to have, you can have many tenants, but they are not noisy. They're not ingesting many logs. So there is no tenant limit per se.
Yeah. Cool. And then I have another question. Do you think it would be possible, and if so, like maybe like a rough guess of how big of a lift it would be to be able to introduce some sizes that could deploy Loki in the SSD mode? Or do you think that that would be too much of a lift given the current sort of architecture of the operator?
Although we started with microservices only because this predates SSD, and it makes it, let's say, easier for many Kubernetes pieces to deploy them. A little bit of background. One reason why we chose microservices was because we are hinting towards autoscaling. For example, if you pick the size 1x small, you cannot go and give more CPU or memory to each component. We would like that if we ever get something like Kida Brilliant finally production ready across the board, we might go and say, okay, pick 1x small and please let me scale to 1x medium, something like that. Or we think also, especially around distributors, maybe introducing features like VPA, because they are a good candidate for vertical autoscaling. We would like to see this, let's say, being more flexible in that regard. SSD by default, introducing it is a nice, in my opinion, contribution. There wasn't, let's say, no volunteer to do this yet, but it would basically be just a small code branch and having, let's say, a new Go package which has just 2 stateful sets, one for the read and one for the and you can then say, if you pick 1x small dash SSD, go in it. I'm sorry for talking too much, but may I just give one hint here? The schema here with 1x small is just, it replicates a little bit how AWS instance type works. So you define 1x, it means you have just one Loki instance, and we can foresee that it will be for hard tenancy customers at 2x. Not implemented yet. It shouldn't be that hard. And then you can have medium, like that gives you the size. And I assume there might be something like variations, like another dot, and you have dot SSD, and you get, let's say, 1x medium SSD. Or if you drop it, you get it in the microservices mode because this was before there. So it's easy extendable, in my opinion, and easy to contribute.
Cool. Thank you.
Ed,
Like the Google
you're
answer.
muted.
Yeah, I saw y'all nod. Google popped up. Are you talking? All right, so the sort of last thing on our agenda is just to talk about some things that are happening in a bit of shameless self-promotion. In addition to sending me birthday cards, you can all join a webinar that I'm doing next week on Loki configuration settings. I haven't actually finished all the material for this yet, so if there's things that you want to see, I don't know, find me on Twitter or GitHub or public Slack or something. But basically what I want to cover is the common configurations that people seem to get tripped up on. We've done a lot to improve defaults over time, but I want to talk about that and maybe what you have as an existing config where you should remove things. And, you know, rely on defaults, how things have changed, configs for query performance ingestion, maybe a little bit about agents. I think the description talks about agents, but I don't know how much we'll talk about that. Yeah, come check that out. And then that's next week. And then the week after next week is Grafana Online, which is also free and virtual. And there are 3 talks in there that talk about Loki. So be sure to check those out and all the other ones, because why not? But there's a couple links here for those talks in the meeting notes if you're watching this on YouTube, and I realize I'm not sharing my screen. Oh well, link the meeting notes in YouTube as well. That's it. It's time for open mic and Q&A, but everybody left on the call works on Loki, so I don't know if we have any questions for each other. Anybody have any questions for each other? What did you guys get me
for the
for my
community?
birthday?
What's your actual age? I think the community wants to know.
My actual age?
I'm kidding. You don't have to do that. I was
It said
just-
23, right?
What do you think it
Yeah.
is, Trevor?
Well, I know because you told Mike yesterday how
Oh,
you thought it was one thing all year, and then
oh
you
yeah.
realized
Yeah, so all right, well this is a funny story. Finish off on a funny story. For like 6 months of this year, coming around towards, you know, Christmas or whatever, I was just like having a small existential crisis about turning 40. And I'm like, oh man, you know, like this is it, right? Like I'm halfway turning 40. And then I did the math one day and I'm like adding it up on my fingers 4 times. And I'm like, oh man, I'm turning 41 this year. I turned 40 last year. And I'm like, wait a minute, did I? And I'm like, oh yeah, I even had like kind of, because it's, you know, pandemic times are a bit weird with stuff, but actually even just had a birthday party, you know, for me, for my friends at so I'll be 41 this year, it turns out. I think I'll add it up again. Oh, actually, I'll be 41 yesterday is really. So yep. Presents.
Thanks for
welcome.
sharing that, Ed. That's hilarious. I think we've all suffered a little bit from a distortion of our perception of time over the last few years.
I gotta tell
so-
you, it helped a little bit with the sort of existential crisis part of it, because I was like, oh well, it already happened, so what do I do now? You know, like,
Yeah, that's one way to get over one of those.
yeah, right. Just don't do math right. Forget that you turned
I
40.
don't want to turn 40. Wake me when I'm 41. Okay.
Yeah.
thanks.
All right. Thanks everybody. See you in a month.
See ya.
Done.
Yeah. Bye.